If Tim Skipper and the Bruins win this game against Indiana, UCLA should hire Coach Skip on the spot.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thank you for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free, wherever it's your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, download. Thanks for making this your first listen. Welcome back, everydayers. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if your first bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. What we're talking about, Tim Skipper's chances of getting the full-time job if he beats UCLA, if UCLA beats Indiana. Then we'll talk about some key injury for Indiana and how that helps Jerry Neuheisel and Nico offensively. And finally, the latest surprising UCLA commit, which leads us and ties us all back to what we're talking about now. How surprising this has been. It is a few weeks removed from you having me tirade on this podcast about how this might be the worst team UCLA's ever had. They might go 0-12. They might pull the over. Nico's decision might be worse than LeBron's decision in terms of the outlook and everything. And in the span of an interim coach changing the vibe, overall coaching switches at the coordinating position, and just new leadership, new vibes, the Bruins have come out and changed everything. If you read the ESPN article about how Tim Skipper has just completely changed the vibe that came out, I believe, October 20th, October 19th, really detailing about what Tim Skipper's been able to do to change his outlook for UCLA, including clean locker rooms, bringing in actual captains. This UCLA team apparently didn't have a captain. They really didn't have actual captains or a leadership council for this team. You would have thought that would have been Nico initially. You would have thought that would have been somebody, but it's not like they apparently named anything. So it really gets back to the question, what was Deshaun Foster and the other team leaders doing? What were they doing? Apparently, Tim Skipper's just been waiting for this opportunity, and he's jumped on the chance. If UCLA goes into Bloomington, where you're going to get some early primetime viewership, with it being a big noon kickoff against the Indiana Hoosiers, who are top 3 team in the country, could very well be the best team in college football, surprisingly. He goes in there. Instead of what USC did by firing Lane Kiffin on the tarmac, UCLA can do the reverse and hand Skipper a gigantic blank check and say, we're done with our coaching search. Here you go. Hire him on the tarmac. Hire him immediately if he goes out and beats Indiana. Because for him to turn around a team that was dreadful, horrible 0-3 start against teams UCLA should have beaten, New Mexico, UNLV. The Bruins very well right now could be a 5-2 team. They could be a 6-1 team if things went their way, and we'd be talking super hype. But I guess UCLA in its history likes to do things under the radar as opposed to front running its way down the schedule. And that's not how the season has been. You've equally been, I have, the most embarrassed I've been as a UCLA fan watching this team, talking about them, to the most proud I've ever seen this team competing, fighting on its worst days. Yes, I was very critical in the last podcast about UCLA's offense and Jerry's calls and Nico's plays and decision-making against Maryland's defenses. But even then, they still came out and gutted it out the win. The last couple of drives, the Bruins able to put in 13 points in their last 3 drives, one of which a full drive for a touchdown, another one needing a field goal for the win, and the other one just sit there wasting time to get a field goal to go up by 7. All right. So all that put together leads us back to Tim Skipper, who I'll touch on the new commit later. But how does a UCLA staff that's not even on solid foundation just yet go get a commit? And not just a commit, a flip of a commit. A flip of a commit at a position of need for UCLA in the future. That just speaks to the ability for Tim Skipper to motivate, to look at the tape and go see that Penn State, if they do something like this on the kickoff return, we're going to onside. And that the fact that we have to practice it, execute it to such a point where we have to score first, build momentum, and build wins on wins on wins. When this team had nothing going for them. Myself, chewing them out on this podcast, other people writing them off, literally, and rightfully so. And then here Tim Skipper comes along, and he has now gotten the attention of the hottest name in college football, and that's Curt Cignetti, because they went into Eugene and beat the Oregon Ducks. Not even last year's national champs, Ohio State, in their first crack at it, despite all of Dan Lanning's games and his crazy plays, could have gotten out of Eugene with a win. It took them with a rematch in the Rose Bowl before Ohio State turned things around and won the national championship last year. So that's how important, how big time Curt Cignetti is with turning around an Indiana program and has the attention where if you look at his latest press conference, he comes out immediately says UCLA is a 3-0 team. 3-0 team looking at this. And I'll talk more about that Cignetti, weekly press conference about this UCLA game. But UCLA's got the attention of Indiana. And if the Bruins can go out there and be like, all right, we've enjoyed that fun. We're causing chaos. We beat Penn State. They fired their coach. Oh, we can turn around, go knock Jonathan Smith out of the running because we can go destroy Michigan State. Okay, we didn't blow it at home in the homecoming uniforms. Great. We didn't want to lose in the throwbacks. But you go out and all of a sudden you beat Indiana 4-4. A bowling campaign is on the table. You still control your destiny if you want to get into dreamland for a Big Ten title game, which is craziness. And then all of a sudden you go from losing to what could have been the 3 to 4 easiest teams you've played to now the 4 toughest. And now that's not exactly the same. That's not exactly what the schedule's been lined up to be. But the way this schedule is designed, the first 6 games were designed for wins. They weren't supposed to beat Penn State. They weren't supposed to go and win some of these toss-ups. And all of a sudden, UCLA, where the rest of the country is firing coaches left and right. You know what UCLA did? They jumped off the Deshaun bandwagon right away. And now you'll finally see Florida a year or two later under Billy Napier. Penn State, surprisingly, getting rid of their coach. Mike Norvell, the hottest coach after week 1, overreaction week 1. Look at Florida State. They're just like Penn State, winless in conference play. And they have a season opening win against Alabama. And Florida State and the ACC, they learn what it's like to go to a late night Saturday affair at the Farm and lose. Or these other teams in the ACC going to the Bay Area and the old school Pac-12 North rivals for UCLA. And they know what it's like to lose. While UCLA's here, and instead of what could be a lot of competitive battling over big name coaches, right? Cignetti just got paid big time with a massive extension by Indiana. Whether it's Dan Mullen's name that comes up, Lane Kiffin to Florida, some other big name coach or coordinator, UCLA might be able to keep Tim Skipper, which if you're saying, all right, you do that, could be a cheap option. And then you build the infrastructure around him. Yes, the UC Regents have just proved a way for UCLA to go out there and get a big name coach. But you know what's the best way? If you're going to hire the interim and keep coordinators like a Kevin Coyle and a Jerry Neuheisel, if they continue to impress, win or lose down the stretch, if they get to a bowl, I think you absolutely have to consider Tim Skipper and the coordinators on the short list. You do that, then all of a sudden, it's not just you have to go overpay some big name. You keep him, and that extra money can build as infrastructure to be spread out towards the likes of more coordinators, more money allocated to other resources needed for UCLA, when all of a sudden you can convince this athletic department, whether you're on the fire Martin Jarman bandwagon or not. Seems like 99.9% of UCLA fans, donors, everybody is on that bandwagon. You can convince everybody, if we rev share so much for UCLA football, all of a sudden that's going to lead to more money, more opportunities for all the other athletic sports. Whereas I wear this shirt, this old school UCLA shirt, if you're watching on YouTube, champions made here is on the back. All right. Maybe I should have worn it backwards, but that's what the motto is. And that's sometimes what's hurt the UCLA model to building a competitive football program year in and year out. Now they've got the guy that embodies what it means to be a UCLA Bruin as a head coach. The good vibes, turning it around, and just grinding it out. Clean locker rooms. Want to be a standout citizen, representing the UCLA, the UC system in the right way. You have the UCLA Bruin and Jerry Neuheisel, and apparently a defensive mastermind out of nowhere in Kevin Coyle. And you're like, dude, what happened? Well, maybe you don't have to go overspend for a coach, but use that money and allocate it elsewhere. And instead of having to go in a negotiating battle to see if Jed Fish leaves Washington or not, or go see if Brett Brennan of Arizona is ready for the primetime at UCLA, you've got the guy who's met every primetime moment, but he has to get a signature win. Tim Skipper has got to beat an Ohio State or an Indiana and still has to beat USC. And if you're beating the team of an Ohio State or an Indiana caliber on the road, mind you, then I think you have to beat Washington and USC. You just have to. You beat Washington and USC, you make it an Indiana win, then certainly Nebraska's beatable. Nebraska just got their handed to them by Minnesota. Minnesota of all teams. 9 sacks on Jalen Raiola. You beat one of these two teams, winnable. But now I'm looking at Washington, USC, and Nebraska. Like, those are fairly winnable games, either at home or on the road at USC, where the Bruins have been winning just about every year they go into the Coliseum. And wouldn't it be something for UCLA to go into USC and get Lincoln Riley fired? Maybe you don't want him fired because then USC can still continue to tank into the ground. That'd be great. And UCLA has their coach in waiting. You don't want to jump too quickly on the bandwagon. But if he beats a Penn State and gets James Franklin fired, gets Curt Cignetti right off a big extension when he's the hottest name in coaching, that if he wasn't extended would go somewhere else, and you beat him in Bloomington with all the national eyes on you again, that's for real. Not that they're not, but that's blank check worthy. Hand it to Skipper and say, you're the guy, our job's closed immediately. How to get to that point? Let's talk about it next with Curt Cignetti's comments about this UCLA team, a key Hoosier injury, and what Nico and Jerry have to do to improve upon last week's pretty rough performance against a stout Maryland defense. The NFL season's here. College football all around us, and soon we even get college basketball. FanDuel is an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Put a bet down. Get $5. If you pick a bet, put $5 in. If it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Look at this UCLA matchup against Indiana. Huge, huge underdogs. Similar numbers if you're looking at FanDuel to what UCLA was getting against Penn State at home. Now, it's a tough one against Indiana in Bloomington. But if you're a new customer, you're like, hey, this UCLA wave, I believe in it. I believe that, hey, maybe I'm going to go for it with the money line. Maybe you're going to just go with the spread and go with a safer, smarter bet and go with UCLA as a huge underdog on the road to Indiana. And you hits, get bonus bets, and think of all that with the player props. You can go with the parlays, all that. It gets you more riding on the action than just simply watching it overall. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Tools that help make a huge difference for business owners is Quo. It was formerly known as OpenPhone, but it's the same great phone system for businesses that you've heard me talk about before, just with a new name. And here's why it matters. All those missed phone calls, that's money left on the table. All those customer conversations, they count, and you need a phone system that can keep you connected 24/7. Quo is the #1 business phone system that streamlines the customer communications, works right through an app on your phone, computer, and there's no more carrying 2 phones or relying on a landline. No, it was formerly known as OpenPhone, but Quo can help you collaborate as a team on the number and calls and texts like a shared inbox, so there's no customer that gets left hanging. See why over 90,000 businesses trust Quo, formerly OpenPhone. Get started free and see 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/lockedoncollege. That's QUO.com/lockedoncollege. And if you've got existing numbers with another service, Quo will port them over at no extra charge. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. Well, the second straight time UCLA has faced a top 10 opponent this year at the time, like Penn State, this time Indiana, UCLA is facing a team that's coming off a pretty devastating injury. At the time for Penn State, it was Tony Rojas, the linebacker, and then we saw Nico run right through, no spy, and run for many yards. For Indiana, the most significant injury to this point now is Kellen Wyatt. And it was briefly touched on by Curt Cignetti when he was talking about injuries for this Indiana team that has largely avoided those injuries, other than a Curtis Rourke broken thumb a year ago. This year, largely avoided those injuries, talked about how he's appreciative of his trainer, but Kellen Wyatt, I believe a knee injury, is supposed to be out a significant portion of the rest of the year, which Cignetti was saying might be the rest of the year. That's a defensive end who is one of the big-time players on this Indiana defense. And you talk about the end, somebody who has 27 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, and while playing in Big Ten play, 4.5 tackles for loss and 2.5 sacks in Big Ten play. All right. That's something where a transfer from Maryland, mind you, imagine that Maryland defense, who, if they had Kellen Wyatt still, all right, that's how good the Maryland defense was without one of Indiana's best players on their roster. Think about that. Maryland's defense could have been even better. You got Wyatt, who comes in and is dominant for Indiana because Curt Cignetti knows how to hit the portal. And while we look at all the SEC guys, he can go see guys at the Marylands and bring in the best talent. Now, that's somebody who's out. And if you talk about keep and contain and what Nico has struggled these last couple of games to do against Michigan State and against the likes of Maryland, it's been to escape. He had a huge, huge day slicing Penn State alive, running the football. 120 plus yards, couple of scores, keeping those drives alive. Indiana, one of the best teams defensively at defending the run. They top 10, top 15 in the country, a little under 90 yards per game rushing the football they allowed in this season so far. Now, UCLA, their bread and butter, has been running the football, keeping Nico upright and running the football. More so, not just exclusively Nico running the ball, it's been the running back by committee. Jalen Berger, Javian Thomas, we've seen Anthony Woods, and most recently, Anthony Frias at various times making plays in this backfield over the last few weeks. Frias with the big 55-yard touchdown run and the big run at the end of the game to set up Mateen Bagani's game-winning field goal. So for the Bruins, it's keeping with the bread and butter. It's being and out-muscling this Indiana team that Curt Cignetti says has shorter practices, wants to keep his team fresh, while it's Tim Skipper's approach that the Bruins were, I'm not going to say that they were soft, all right? He didn't use those words. Those are my words. But he talked about strain. If you read this ESPN article, the strain is the emphasis, not a one-hit wonder, upholding the professionalism from his coaching staff, upholding this new standard that they've set for themselves, that Curt Cignetti has come out and said they're a 3-0 football team. Not the 3-4, but the 3-0 football team that we've seen the last few weeks when Jerry's become the play caller, and now that Kevin Coyle has been around for 4 games since the Northwestern game. But something that caught my eye, in addition to this injury, where, yes, Nico can maybe work around the edges a little bit more if he wants to get outside, you want to get somebody running to the outside, namely Nico, if he wants to scramble outside. Then with Curt Cignetti, he said he's been watching exclusively this offense run by Jerry, all right, with Noel Mazzoni this last couple of weeks. He doesn't really watch the tape other than TV. And maybe that's some coach gamesmanship. But if that's the case, here's my idea. It's going to sound dumb considering none of those plays ever worked. But with Tino Sinceri's playbook, you wonder if you can go to 2 to 3 plays. You go back to the old offense that was just installed prior to this season in the offseason. You find the 2 to 3 best plays that can be executed by your team that haven't been showcased on tape the last 3 weeks, and you go execute those plays. Ones that I don't really know what those plays could have been, but you find something that you practice this week. You're like, I like that concept, and bring that in. Something that's a new wrinkle that the team's already practiced before. Can someone still remember that verbiage? And if you work on it for a week, not a full install, but just 2 to 3 plays, and that can keep Indiana on their toes, keep them guessing, all right? That's what Maryland's defense did against UCLA, all right? I was reading something from the Mighty Bruin, a great write-up about how Maryland's defense, they did so many changes defensively up front by their opponent, which is, how you're supposed to do it coaching-wise, but you can't always execute it. Sometimes coaches have their base defenses. Well, Maryland, leading up to the UCLA game, has had so many different base defenses from a starting lineup standpoint that kept a new play caller, a quarterback that's on his second offense in an individual season, guessing, all right? Now, Indiana, they're more about physicality, a lot about pressure, a lot about blitzing and making sure Nico's off his game, which might lead to UCLA having a lot more success offensively than they did against Maryland. Well, Maryland is all right. They're there in the flats. They have DBs that make plays. Indiana, yes, they made plays. They had huge days against Dante Moore. But if UCLA can find a way to get those underneath crossing routes, hit those quick hitters, they might do better against Indiana than they did against Maryland at home. Weird to say that, but it's huge. As long as UCLA can run the football in those wrinkles, I'm pretty sure Curt Cignetti is going to be ready for any 4th down gamesmanship, any fake punts trying to be run by Tim Skipper. So the gamesmanship, I'm thinking, go back to that old playbook, pick 2 to 3 of the best plays, and all of a sudden implement those this week, something that Curt Cignetti, by his own admission, has said he doesn't really look at because that's not this UCLA team. Well, you are what your record says. Now, with Tim Skipper and Jerry Neuheisel and Kevin Coyle, that combination, 3-0, 3-1, since they've come together, depending on which guy you're talking about when they entered in as the official coach. UCLA, make that your new wrinkle this week. Couple of plays that are literally on tape, but Indiana's not even looking, plays your players have already practiced, and you just mix it in. Maybe with the wrinkle of the new stuff, and bam, something you haven't showcased, because we've seen the last, 2 to 3 weeks, we've seen the Nico clap, run to the side, Jalen Berger takes the direct snap and runs for it. Sometimes it's a big play. Sometimes it hasn't been as effective as it was against Penn State when it led to a big run or a big touchdown like it did against Michigan State, against Maryland. And Indiana's bread and butter, physical up front. Now, they will miss a Kellen Wyatt, and I wonder if that's going to lead to more outside runs or the ability for scrambling from Nico. So we've seen him scramble up the gut, up the middle when he steps up into the pocket, doesn't throw the ball, but he'll run through and slice and dice the defense that way. I think Indiana and Curt Cignetti will game plan for that. They're going to throw a lot of pressure, but if Nico can break through some of that pressure, we might see another long run or two, all right? The leading rusher might be Nico against Indiana, might get to the outside, and bring in a couple of the old plays from the old playbook, and that might be the new wrinkle that UCLA has in store for this week, because they've always had something. They've tried something, whether it's getting Penn State, using their lack of discipline, maybe it's another fourth down, go for it type of play like they did for the Michigan State game, or just something different to keep the teams off balance that some coaches just don't like to do. We even saw that with Coach Eck of the New Mexico Lobos. He did something against Michigan, the goal line between the legs play for a touchdown, went with a double pass against the Bruins, and then they realized they could run the football. UCLA can do something similar to get on top early and then out-muscle them late. Because this Bruins team has been physically pushing around the teams in front of them, most importantly, competing. When in weeks prior, or even last year, the Bruins couldn't do anything in terms of the physicality up front. Now, with the adjustments, huge. They've seen 2 or 3 plays that can wrinkle in, mixed with a huge Indiana injury that can lead to UCLA success this week. Finally, a surprising commit. We'll talk about the new commit and what this means for UCLA, the fact they can get one in the midst of so much uncertainty here in the end of 2025 on Locked On UCLA. Let's be honest, most of us can't even name all of our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth, because between the 401ks, the savings, the investments, it's easy to lose track, and that can mean even leaving money on the table. Well, that's why I started using Monarch, the all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together. One clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. For me, I can just get blown away. There's so much different ideas when it comes to finances that I've just been so confused, so oblivious to. And let me not forget to remind you, my mother reminds me every time I see her, what are you doing with your finances? 401k, savings, investments. What are you going to do to expand that? Heck, even my stepdad does the same thing. Well, Monarch makes me be able to rebut that and says, hey, I know what I'm doing, and I can build wealth without even having to touch a spreadsheet by organizing my accounts, tracking my spending, and getting a better handle on my investments. So don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com/LockedOnCollege for half off your first year. Again, monarch.com for 50% off your first year. All right, cruising things on. UCLA's got a new commit here in 2025 for the class of 2026. A surprising flip. Travis Roberson, who announced his commitment, was a former commit to Bowling Green, a 6'7" offensive lineman who, man, coming from West Bloomfield, Michigan, seeing the connection, that 6'6", 6'7", over 320 pounds from West Bloomfield, Michigan, was all of a sudden a flip that came out of nowhere for UCLA. You're like, what? UCLA can get a commit without even a permanent head coach in place? And that goes back to the first segment, that this staff, what they've been able to do with the general manager, with everything UCLA's been able to handle the adversity-wise, you go get a win against Indiana, you're going to start seeing a swoon of guys come through to UCLA and be the hottest trending place in college football. I talked about this with Brian Smith. You want UCLA to be the hottest trending name recruiting-wise in the portal, and by the time the early season winter high school commitment day comes, you want the guys to be flipping to UCLA. And they might. They went from all leaving UCLA to a class that, according to 24/7 Sports, is close to 80th in the country. Let me tell you, 80th with all the decommits. But then you start winning some battles. You keep some of these guys. You see the genuine connection between the guys and the staff that haven't just left. Maybe they're going to keep their options open, the guys who are still committed. And maybe there are guys who have decommitted that are trying to see how this UCLA situation will play out. But now, yes, as much as Deshaun Foster got the UCLA recruiting game back going, you can see that with better coaches, the program is heading in a better direction. Travis Roberson coming in, one of two potential West Bloomfield products on the roster, according to this 24/7 Sports article. Jameer Benjamin, another guy from West Bloomfield. So you wonder if there's a connection there, saying, hey, dude, this is a completely different vibe. Come to UCLA. I'm not really insight like that, but man, you bring in a guy that wants the academics, which is what Roberson wanted, and then you bring in Travis Roberson, who comes in and says, hey, wow, I want the academics, I want the game, I want it all coming to UCLA. Because man, oh man, this is the place. If you want to play football, you want to be academically sound, you need it all coming to UCLA. And UCLA can provide that with the NIL opportunities. UCLA can certainly be big enough to have a decent rev share for some of these players, academics, and play football on a primetime stage. We're seeing the guys realize that in real time, like a Travis Robertson who came in and all of a sudden became, wait, this is a guy who you can flip and go to UCLA and have an opportunity to be academically sound and play on a team that's fun to watch in the Big Ten and still go back home to the Midwest. That's where the national footprint can still exist. As much as you want to recruit the backyard, you can still go in the Midwest and go get the big offensive lineman to join an offensive line room that has been transformed mid-year. And that's probably one of those guys who's like, wait a minute, 3-star? And you see some of these guys who went from much maligned to fairly competitive just with a coaching switch. Man, that is something that Robertson wants to be a part of, and maybe other guys do too. And maybe Robertson does or doesn't pan out. But the fact that the Bruins are able to land somebody like this is important because they didn't have many things going for them, obviously, a few weeks ago. And it's been a while since UCLA has anything going for them in the recruiting game. One snap of the finger, bam, takes one recruit. One flip, a decommit and a flip. Next thing you know, UCLA could be the hottest thing in the market in the fall, in the winter, in December. I know the portal isn't officially open. The window is not open till early January. Man, if you have a chance to solidify everything and Tim Skipper goes out and wins more games, I'm going to have to eat my own words again saying you don't want to rush with this recruiting. You turn that around and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, you go beat Indiana? Yeah, actually just give him a blank check. I'm sorry, just give him a blank check. That's craziness. So welcome Travis Robertson to the UCLA family for now as a commit. We'll see how this plays out because there's so many things that can happen between now and November, December, for the better or for worse, which is why you got to be here on Locked On UCLA as we get crazy and enjoy the rest of the UCLA football season. Hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.